My quest to learn about and experience the different Indian gaming casinos continued this past Christmas season, especially with the recent Proposition 26 versus 27 battle in the air. And one day I visited the Rincon-owned Harrah's Resort Southern California, Casino Pauma, and the Paula Casino Spa Resort. This video will feature Casino Pauma and the history of the Pauma Band of Luiseno Indians. Casino Pauma was the second casino I visited of the day. And after the relative disappointment of Harrah's, I was happy to find Christmas decorations were still up here. At the time of this video, I see they have an all-you-can-eat fried chicken buffet on Wednesdays for $9.99. And they have a surf and turf buffet on Fridays that includes 2 lobster tails and all-you-can-eat meat selections. One major thing that makes this casino different from all the rest is that they do not have a hotel. But they have worked with an architecture company to help realize a more grand vision for their future. And look, they have a brief history and memorial display near the front. And speaking of history, this drone video is from another channel as the weather did not cooperate, but original video will be back in the next video. Today, the Pauma have roughly 5,800 acres of land. Pauma means place where there is water. I will be telling their version of their history as found on their website, as I have done with all the Indian tribes I have covered. Before contact with European settlers, their ancestors spent much of their time along the San Luis Rey River between Palomar Mountain and the valleys below. By their account, they were ordinary people. In 1769, a Spanish ship sailed into San Diego Bay. Father Junipero Serra and military commander Gaspar de Portola were the first men on record to have interacted with the indigenous people of what is now California. The indigenous did not foresee the devastating changes ahead. European interaction with the indigenous people of Southern California was limited until the mid-1700s. The Spanish set up the mission system to protect their claim to California land, economic prosperity, and religious conversion. The Mission San Luis Rey was established in 1798 and brought many changes. The Spanish gave the name Luiseno to multiple tribes of the region near Mission San Luis Rey. Since the Pauma was located inland, initially its people were not extensively drawn into the mission environment. But with the Paula Asistencia in the early 1800s, the presence of the church and the Spanish soldiers became more prevalent. By then, most Pauma people lived in the Spanish villages and worked as laborers for the missions. In 1834, the Mexican government secularized the missions, and the mission era ended. And when that happened, unscrupulous ranchers moved in and took rich, fertile lands from the Luiseno people. Far away from California, Indian boarding schools were thought up by Captain Richard Pratt, a former military officer. The first Indian school opened in 1878 in Pennsylvania. It was the Carlisle Indian School. Pratt's goal was to kill the Indian to save the man. These schools were extremely strict with harsh discipline. They were often far away with visitations forbidden, going as far as preventing children from returning home during summer break. Students wore military uniforms and were forced to march. Students were forbidden to speak their native languages or practice traditional customs. They were forced to read the Bible and memorize the Lord's Prayer. They were taught that their native ways were inferior to the white man. Students were expected to spy on each other. Their education was preparing them for a life of servitude. The schools were a pipeline of slave labor. After years of separation, many students found it very difficult to fit back into their reservation communities when they tried to return, and thousands of Indian children never returned. Graves can still be seen at the sites of these former schools. Pauma children, along with other Luiseno children, were mostly sent to the Sherman Indian School in Riverside, California. 43 tribes would be represented at that school. Pauma elders fought to have the right to send their children to nearby Pauma Elementary instead of the Sherman Indian School in Riverside. But that took a court order, and far too often the Bureau of Indian Affairs took children away from their families. The center of activity in the Pauma Valley in 1846 was Rancho Pauma. The rancho was granted in 1844. Pauma Indians provided much of the labor needed to operate Rancho Pauma. The Pauma were reduced to tenants on their native lands. They worked as cowboys, servants, and laborers. And things only got worse when the Mexican-American War triggered the Pauma Massacre. After the Mexican-American War in 1846, the Luisenos came under the rule of the United States. They had few rights and many were homeless. Anglo-American settlers took the best farm and grazing lands in the valleys, and mining speculation attracted other Anglo-Saxon Americans to Palomar Mountain. In the mid-1850s, many treaties between the United States and California Indians were negotiated, but the California state legislature lobbied Congress to deny federal ratification of the treaties, as they wanted control of the 7.5 million acres of land and its resources. Thus, homesteaders could lay claim to tribal lands. In 1875, President Grant set aside reservation land for other tribes in the area, but not the Pauma. Finally, in 1891, reservation land was set aside for the Pauma. In 1892, the Serrano Ranch site was designated as part of the Pauma Reservation. The Bishop of Los Angeles, Francisco Mora, was a big part in the Pauma keeping part of their homeland. However, California Indians still wanted to make good on lands promised from old treaties. And a series of laws passed in the early 20th century gradually paved the way for progress. The Jurisdictional Act of 1928 allowed Indians to sue the federal government and use the state's Attorney General's office to represent them. Then the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 allowed Indians the right to form businesses and other organizations. It also allowed credit for Indians, certain rights to self-government, and vocational training. Then, the Indian Claims Commission Act of 1946 created an agency to hear and determine claims of tribes and other identifiable groups of American Indians living in the United States. But the Great Depression and World War II made progress slow. And then the Indian Self-Determination Act of 1975 granted water rights, health services, education, and more overall autonomy. In 1990, the passage of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act allowed Native Americans to regain access to sacred artifacts and human remains that were found in museums. And then, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act allowed the Pauma to open their casino in 2001. I came back at night for a different scene. By the way, this place has a generous secluded parking lot. It's like the Field of Dreams. Hey, the Casino of Dreams. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe for self-reliance. And why not make some magic?